The photograph fell from my trembling fingers, landing face up on the hardwood floor like a final verdict. Daniel's eyes, closed in eternal peace, his face pale, but still handsome even in death. And beside him, her hand clasped in his, her face turned away from the camera but unmistakable. Mira. His colleague. The woman they'd told me was just a friend who happened to be at the hospital when he was admitted. The woman who had called me with the news, her voice breaking as she described how he'd slipped away peacefully alone. Let me tell you how it happened, because no one else knows the truth yet. I remember the morning it began, 3 years before Daniel's death. The sunlight filtering through our bedroom curtains, the way it always caught the dust motes dancing in the air. Daniel's arm wrapped around my waist, his breath warm against my neck. "Morning, Clara," he'd whisper, and I'd turn to find his eyes already open, watching me with that look that made me feel like the only person in the world. We had a ritual coffee in bed, talking about our dreams, our plans, the mundane details of our day ahead. Daniel would leave for the hospital where he worked as a pediatric surgeon, and I'd go to my studio where I painted portraits that paid our bills and fed my soul. Our life was comfortable, predictable, built on a foundation of love that had grown stronger over 12 years of marriage. We had friends who envied what we had. Evelyn and James, who came over for dinner every other Friday, always commented on how Daniel looked at me. "Like you hung the moon," Evelyn would say, and Daniel would just smile, squeezing my hand under the table. Our son, Noah, was 8 then, with Daniel's dark hair and my green eyes. He was the perfect blend of us, and watching Daniel teach him to ride a bike or help with homework filled my chest with a warmth so intense it sometimes brought tears to my eyes. We had a mortgage, 2 cars, a golden retriever named Max, and a future that stretched before us, bright and endless. Daniel was respected at work, known for his skill with tiny, broken bodies and his gentle way with frightened parents. He often worked long hours, sometimes taking emergency calls in the middle of the night. I never questioned it, never doubted him. Why would I? He came home to me always. His scrubs smelled of antiseptic and something uniquely him. His hands, so steady in the operating room, would trace patterns on my back as we fell asleep. We had our arguments, of course, about money, about how much time he spent at the hospital, about whether to have another child, but we always found our way back to each other. Always. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in September. Daniel had been working unusually late for weeks, coming home after Noah was already asleep, smelling not of hospital antiseptic, but of something else, perfume, faint but distinct. "New hand sanitizer at the hospital," he'd said when I asked, not meeting my eyes. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But later that night, as he slept beside me, I found a small silver earring on the floor beside his side of the bed. It wasn't mine. I picked it up, the metal cool against my palm, and slipped it into his sock drawer without a word. A small, secret accusation that I couldn't yet voice. The inconsistencies grew. A text message that appeared on his phone when it was charging on the kitchen counter. "Can't stop thinking about last night." From Mira. When I asked, he said they'd been working late on a difficult case, that she was struggling with the outcome. She's young, Clara. Still takes these things personally. I nodded, accepting his explanation, even as something cold settled in my stomach. I told myself I was overthinking, that my mind was creating problems where none existed. Daniel and I were solid. We had survived job losses, a miscarriage, my mother's cancer. We could survive anything. Mira started appearing more often in our lives. At hospital fundraisers, always standing a little too close to Daniel. At the grocery store once, where I ran into them shopping together. Just grabbing supplies for the department potluck, Daniel had said, while Mira avoided my eyes. She was beautiful in a way I wasn't young, confident, with a laugh that drew people in. 28 to my 42, her whole life ahead of her, while mine was already half-lived. I hated myself for the comparison, for the insecurity that crept in like a thief in the night. The tipping point came 6 months before Daniel died. I was cleaning his home office, a room I rarely entered unless he asked me to bring him something. Tucked behind a stack of medical journals was a small velvet box. Not my birthday or anniversary, but I opened it anyway, my heart pounding. Inside was a silver necklace with a small diamond pendant, nothing extravagant, but clearly expensive. On a tiny card inside, in Daniel's handwriting, for M. All my love, always. I closed the box quickly, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put it back where I'd found it. That night, I watched him move around our kitchen, so familiar, so beloved, and wondered how I could have been so blind. How long had this been happening? How many lies had I accepted without question? I started investigating quietly, a sickness growing in my stomach as I uncovered more evidence. Receipts for dinners I knew nothing about. Hotel charges on our credit card statement when he was supposed to be at medical conferences. A second phone I found in his gym bag, filled with messages that made me feel physically ill. I love you, but I can't leave her yet. Soon, I promise. Last night was everything. Each discovery was a fresh wound, and I began to wonder if I would survive the bleeding. Confrontations were deflected or dismissed. You're imagining things, Clara. Work has been stressful. Why are you trying to find problems where there are none? His denials were so convincing that sometimes I almost believed him. Almost. But the evidence mounted, and with it, a wall grew between us. I stopped asking questions, stopped seeking the truth. Instead, I retreated into myself, preserving the fragments of our marriage that were still real, still true. Noah needed his father. I needed the illusion of my intact family, even if I knew it was built on lies. My body began to rebel against the secrets I was keeping. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. My hands shook constantly. Sleep became impossible without pills, and even then, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, mind replaying every suspicious moment, every half-truth. Friends noticed the change. Evelyn pulled me aside at one of our dinner gatherings. Clara, you're not yourself. Is everything okay? I wanted to tell her everything, to unburden myself, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain that my husband was slipping away, that our marriage was dying long before his body began to fail? The devastating clue came 2 weeks before Daniel's heart attack. I was looking for our tax documents in the filing cabinet when I found a folder marked insurance. Inside, alongside our life insurance policies, was a document I'd never seen before, a life insurance policy with Daniel as the policyholder and Mira as the sole beneficiary. $5 million. The date of issue was 3 years ago, right around the time I'd first noticed the changes in him. I sank to the floor, the papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. This wasn't just an affair. This was a betrayal so complete, so calculated, that it stole the air from my lungs. He had been planning a future without me, without Noah. He had been writing me out of his life while I was still living it with him. That night, I confronted him with the policy. His face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Clara, I can explain, he started, but I held up my hand, unable to hear more lies. Don't, I said, my voice strangely calm. Just don't. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the space between us filled with everything unsaid. I was going to tell you, he finally said. I was going to end it. But even as he spoke, I knew it wasn't true. He wasn't ending anything, he was just getting caught. The betrayal reached its climax on a rainy Tuesday in March. I was in my studio, working on a portrait of a young girl, when my phone rang. It was the hospital. Mrs. Peterson? There's been an incident. Your husband, He collapsed during surgery. We're doing everything we can. I dropped everything and drove to the hospital, rain blurring my vision, my heart pounding against my ribs. When I arrived, Daniel was in the ICU, machines beeping around him, his face ashen. The doctor explained that he'd had a massive heart attack, that they'd managed to revive him, but the prognosis wasn't good. Mira was there when I arrived, her eyes red from crying. I was in the OR with him, she said, taking my hand. He was operating on a little girl with a heart defect. He saved her, Clara. He saved her life before he collapsed. I wanted to pull my hand away, to scream at her, to tell her I knew everything, but Daniel was dying, and there would be time for confrontations later. Or so I thought. Daniel never regained consciousness. He died 2 days later, surrounded by what I thought were his colleagues and me, holding his hand as the machines went silent one by one. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and sympathetic faces. People I hadn't seen in years came to pay their respects, telling me what a wonderful man Daniel was, how he'd touched so many lives. Each compliment felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Mira stood at the edge of the crowd, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. People comforted her, too, assuming her grief was that of a colleague who'd lost a mentor. Only I knew the truth, and I was too exhausted, too hollowed out by grief and betrayal to speak it. In the weeks that followed, I moved through life like a ghost. People brought casseroles and offered condolences, their voices muffled by the thick fog of my sorrow. Noah asked questions I couldn't answer. Where did Daddy go? Will he come back? Was he sad? And I gave him the same hollow reassurances that others gave me. Daddy is in heaven. He's not coming back, but he'll always be watching over us. He was the happiest when he was with you. Each lie was a betrayal of my own values, but how could I tell my 8-year-old that his father had been living a double life, that the man he idolized had been planning to leave us? The insurance company called 3 weeks after Daniel's death. They needed to process the claim, they said, but there was a complication. There appears to be a secondary policy, Mrs. Peterson, the adjuster explained. A substantial one with a different beneficiary. I closed my eyes, the betrayal fresh and raw even in death. I'm aware of it, I said, my voice flat. It was for his colleague, Mira Chen. I assume she'll be claiming it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Actually, Mrs. Peterson, that's the complication. Miss Chen has informed us that she doesn't want the proceeds. She's requested that everything be paid to you and your son. I hung up the phone and sank to the floor, the same way I had when I found the policy. Why would she refuse the money? Was it guilt? Or was there something more I didn't understand? The questions gnawed at me, adding to the mountain of grief I was already carrying. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night, unable to breathe, my heart racing. The doctor prescribed medication, but it only dulled the edges of my pain, never truly touching the core of it. The confrontation with Mira happened a month after Daniel's death. She showed up at my door unannounced, holding a manila envelope. We need to talk, she said, and I let her in, too tired to fight, too curious to refuse. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd laughed and argued and planned our future. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I know that's not enough, but I am. I waited, my hands clasped in my lap, my heart a stone in my chest. Daniel and I, it started 3 years ago, she began, and I braced myself for the details I didn't want but needed to hear. It was never supposed to be serious. We were working closely on a difficult case, spending long hours together. One night, after we lost a patient, we just broke down together. One thing led to another and she trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. He told me he was unhappy, that you and he had grown apart, that you didn't understand the pressure he was under. Each word was a fresh wound, and I wondered if I would survive this conversation. He promised me he would leave you, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He kept saying soon, but soon never came. Then he got sick and everything changed. She slid the envelope across the table. He wrote this a few days before he died. He asked me to give it to you if anything happened to him. I stared at the envelope, my name written in Daniel's familiar script on the front. Why are you giving this to me? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why not just keep the money and disappear? She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it mirrored my own. Because he loved you, Clara. In the end, he chose you. And because I have to live with myself. After she left, I sat at the table for hours, the envelope unopened before me. Part of me wanted to burn it, to deny Daniel this final explanation, this last attempt to justify his betrayal. But another part, the part that still loved him despite everything, needed to know. Finally, as darkness fell outside our windows, I tore open the envelope and began to read. Dearest Clara, it began, and already my vision was blurred with tears. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say goodbye properly, to explain, to beg for your forgiveness. There's no excuse for what I've done, no justification that can undo the pain I've caused you. All I can offer is the truth, as incomplete and selfish as it may seem. 3 years ago, when my affair with Mira began, I was at a low point in my life. We had lost the baby, and you were grieving in a way I couldn't reach. Work was overwhelming, and I felt like I was failing at everything as a husband, as a father, as a doctor. Mira was there, listening when I needed to talk, understanding the pressures I faced in ways I thought you couldn't. I was weak, Clara. I was selfish and weak, and I made choices that have destroyed everything good in my life. But something changed in the last few months. When you found the insurance policy, when you looked at me with such hurt and disappointment, I saw clearly what I was about to lose. I started ending things with Mira, planning how to come clean to you, how to beg for your forgiveness, how to rebuild what I had broken. I canceled the policy, started a new one with you and Noah as beneficiaries. I was going to tell you everything on our anniversary, but then my health started failing and I was scared, Clara. So scared of dying without your forgiveness, of leaving this earth with this between us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that my actions have consequences that will ripple through our lives long after I'm gone. But I hope, somehow, you can find it in your heart to remember the good years, to remember the man who loved you with everything he had, even when he was broken and lost. Tell Noah I love him, that I'll be watching over him. And know that, in the end, you were my home, my anchor, my everything. All my love, always. Daniel. I read the letter 3 times, each word etching itself into my memory. There was no relief in his confession, no closure in his explanation. There was only the hollow ache of what might have been, the bitter taste of a love that had been tarnished by betrayal. I crumpled the letter in my hand, then smoothed it out again, folding it carefully and placing it back in the envelope. Some truths don't set you free. They just anchor you more firmly to your pain. The fallout from Daniel's death and confession was like a slow-motion explosion, the debris of our life scattering in every direction. I had to tell Noah about the affair, not in detail, but enough to explain the changes that were coming. Daddy made some mistakes, honey, I said, holding him as he cried, his small body shaking against mine. But he loved you very much, and that never changed. The simplicity of a child's understanding was both a blessing and a curse. He accepted what I told him, moved on more quickly than I could, while I remained stuck in the wreckage of our past. Friends and family reacted in different ways. Evelyn was furious on my behalf, her anger a protective shield around my vulnerability. I never liked him, she said, though we both knew it wasn't true. There was always something off about him. James, ever the pragmatist, focused on the practical aspects, insurance, finances, selling the house that suddenly felt too big, too full of ghosts. My mother, who had survived my father's infidelity decades earlier, simply held me as I cried, her understanding born of experience. It gets easier, she promised, and I wanted to believe her. The secondary betrayals hurt almost as much as the primary one. Daniel's brother, Mark, who had known about the affair and said nothing. His best friend, Thomas, who had covered for Daniel on nights he was with Mira. Each revelation was another crack in the foundation of my life, another reminder that the world I had believed in was an illusion. I cut ties with some, forgave others, but the trust one had once placed so freely was gone, replaced by a cautious skepticism that colored all my relationships. My grief was complicated, a tangled mess of love and anger, loss and betrayal. Some days, I missed Daniel so intensely it was a physical pain, a hollow ache in my chest where he used to be. Other days, I was consumed by rage, my mind replaying every lie, every deception, every moment he had looked me in the eye while living another life. I went to therapy, where I learned that complicated grief was normal, that my conflicting emotions were valid. But knowing something was normal didn't make it hurt any less. The physical toll of emotional devastation was unexpected. I developed migraines that left me bedridden for days. My hair started falling out in handfuls. I lost 20 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, my clothes hanging loosely on a frame that felt foreign to me. Sleep remained elusive, my nights filled with dreams of Daniel, sometimes happy memories of our life together, sometimes nightmares of his betrayal. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a woman hollowed out by grief, her eyes haunted by things she couldn't unsee. Work became my refuge, the one place where I could lose myself in something other than my pain. Painting portraits had always been about capturing the essence of a person, but now it became about finding the humanity in every face, the stories behind every pair of eyes. My clients noticed a change in my work. "There's more depth now," one of them told me. More emotion. I didn't explain that the emotion came from a place of profound loss, that every portrait was a way of working through my own grief, one brushstroke at a time. Noah became my anchor, the one constant in a world that had been upended. At 9, he was wise beyond his years, his understanding of loss far beyond what any child should have to comprehend. "It's okay to be sad, Mom," he told me one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. "Dad wouldn't want you to be sad forever, but it's okay to be sad now." His simple wisdom cut through my complicated grief, reminding me that even in the midst of pain, life continued, love endured. The slow reckoning came gradually, like the changing of seasons. A year after Daniel's death, I sold our house, moving to a smaller place across town with a studio attached where I could work late into the night without disturbing Noah. The new space was ours alone, free of the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I changed my routine, started running in the mornings, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement a meditation of sorts. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away, found comfort in their unwavering support. Unexpected moments of grief still caught me off guard. Hearing our song on the radio. Finding an old photo of us tucked inside a book. The smell of his cologne on a stranger passing by. Each memory was a fresh wave of pain, but now I could write it out, knowing it would eventually recede. I started a journal, writing letters to Daniel that I never intended to send, articulating the anger, the love, the confusion that still swirled within me. "I miss you," I wrote one night. "I hate you for what you did to us, but I miss you still." Therapy helped, giving me tools to navigate the complex landscape of my grief. My therapist, a gentle woman with kind eyes and a patient presence, encouraged me to find meaning in the pain. Grief changes us, she said. It doesn't have to break us. I learned to sit with my feelings, to acknowledge them without letting them consume me. I learned that forgiveness wasn't about absolving Daniel of his sins, but about freeing myself from the burden of anger. I wasn't there yet, but I could see the path ahead. One moment of unexpected grace came on the anniversary of Daniel's death. I had taken the day off work, planning to spend it in quiet reflection, but Noah had other plans. Let's do something Dad would have liked, he suggested, and so we found ourselves at the animal shelter, where we adopted a scruffy terrier mix with one ear that stood up and one that flopped down. We'll call him Buddy, Noah declared, and as the puppy licked my face, his tail wagging furiously, I felt something shift inside me, a tiny crack of light in the darkness that had enveloped me for so long. 2 years after Daniel's death, I ran into Mira at the grocery store. She looked different, thinner, her face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own. We stood in the produce aisle, surrounded by the vibrant colors of fruits and vegetables, 2 women bound together by a man who was no longer alive. "How are you?" she asked, and for the first time, I heard genuine concern in her voice, not guilt or obligation. "I'm getting there," I replied, and it was the truth. We talked for a few minutes, awkwardly at first, then with a growing ease that surprised us both. She had left the hospital, was working at a clinic across town. She was still single, still processing her own grief and guilt. As we parted ways, I felt not forgiveness, exactly, but something close to understanding. We were both casualties of Daniel's choices, both left to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. Reflection came with time, the distance giving me perspective I couldn't have found in the midst of my pain. I came to see Daniel not as a hero or a villain, but as a flawed human being who had made terrible choices. I remembered the good years, our early marriage, the birth of Noah, the vacations and holidays and quiet moments that had constituted our life together. I acknowledged the bad years, the distance that had grown between us, the lies and betrayals that had eroded the foundation of our marriage. I held both truths in my heart, accepting that love and betrayal could coexist, that a person could be both wonderful and terribly, terribly flawed. I learned that some wounds don't fully close, that they become part of you, scars that tell the story of what you've survived. The anger had softened, replaced by a melancholy acceptance of what was and what might have been. I had built a new life for Noah and me, one that was different from the one I had planned, but not necessarily lesser. We had our routines, our friends, our small joys. We had each other. Hard-won wisdom came gradually, through tears and sleepless nights, through moments of clarity and periods of confusion. I learned that grief has its own timeline, that it can't be rushed or forced. I learned that love doesn't always look like we expect it to, that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let go. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive the unimaginable and still find reasons to get up in the morning. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting, but about integrating the pain into the larger narrative of your life, making it part of your story without letting it become the whole story. One evening, as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, I found it, the picture that had started this journey of discovery and pain. Daniel in death, his hand clasped in Myra's, her face turned away from the camera. I looked at it differently now, not as evidence of betrayal, but as a moment in time, a fragment of a story more complicated than I had initially understood. Daniel had died in her arms, yes, but he had lived in mine. He had chosen me in the end, had tried, in his own flawed way, to make things right. It didn't erase the hurt, didn't justify the betrayal, but it added a layer of complexity to a story I had initially seen in black and white. I put the photograph back in the box, along with the letter Daniel had written, the insurance policy, the earring I had found so long ago. These were artifacts of a life that no longer existed, evidence of a love that had been both real and illusory. I didn't need them anymore. The memories were etched in my mind, the lessons learned in my heart. I was ready to move forward, not forgetting Daniel, but no longer defined by his choices, his betrayals, his death. The ending came quietly, without fanfare or revelation. It was just another Tuesday, much like the one when Daniel had died, but this time the sun was shining, the sky a brilliant blue. Noah was at school, Buddy was sleeping at my feet, and I was in my studio, working on a portrait of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. As I added the final touches to the painting, I thought of Daniel, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with the soft ache of memory. He had been my husband, my partner, my betrayer, my teacher. He had broken my heart and, in doing so, had somehow helped me find a strength I didn't know I possessed. I put down my brush and walked to the window, looking out at the world that continued to turn, indifferent to my personal tragedies and triumphs. The photograph had fallen from my trembling hands that day, revealing a truth that had shattered my world. But in the wreckage, I had found myself flawed and fragile, but resilient. I had learned that love could survive betrayal, that healing was possible even when the wounds ran deep. I had learned that I could survive the death of a dream and still find reasons to dream again. The photograph lay in a box somewhere in the attic now, its power diminished, its truth absorbed into the larger truth of a life that continued, in spite of everything.